I think it's exciting to be part of kind of like a learning community as we're trying to like carefully and cautiously figure out the best practices to use this new technology that's available to us. I'd like someone that's been suspicious to continue their skepticism, but then also extend a little bit of generosity towards preachers who do use ChatGPT, that we're still being as prayerful and careful and thoughtful and trying to use this as one resource amongst many, not the only one. Hey, welcome to the Expositors Collective Podcast, episode 373. I'm your host, Mike Neglia. Well, what you're about to listen to is a conversation that I had with my friend and colleague, Nick Cady, about some of the philosophical challenges and opportunities that AI and artificial intelligence is presenting to thoughtful Christians like you. And then we also talk about helpful or unethical ways to use ChatGPT and similar programs in our sermon preparation process. And so if you are trying to get your head around this new technology, if you're trying to have some other Christians like think about this in public with you, well, then you've come to the right spot. Nick is the pastor of Whitefields Community Church in Longmont, Colorado. He also serves with me on the Expositors Collective leadership team. And as you heard earlier, he is the host of the upcoming Expositors Collective training event in Longmont, Colorado. So if you have any further questions about ethical use of AI, well, I'm sure Nick would love the chance to speak to you in person April 4th and 5th. This episode is being co-released here on the Expositors Collective podcast feed, and then also on the Theology for the People podcast feed. And if you don't subscribe to that already, I recommend that you go over and do yourself a favor and subscribe to that podcast as well. I love the way that Nick thinks, and I especially love the way that he makes complex ideas be accessible and simple. Truly, it lives up to the name Theology for the People. All right, so I'm going to get out of the way, and you can listen to me and Nick theologize a little bit about AI. And then the second half is real practical steps that we've taken to ethically incorporate it into our sermon prep routine.
All right, let's talk about AI. I know you're a fan.
Captain. Yes.
Yeah. I know you're a fan. I have actually, Mike, you inspired me to use AI more. So congratulations.
Yeah, I was a pretty early adopter of ChatGPT. You know, first just like full on just curiosity and, you know, jokes, you know, and like making funny poems about my kids. And then, you know, and from like a very early on thing, the kind of thought was like, what could this look like for life and ministry? And so I've been dabbling in it for a long time, going deeper and deeper, hopefully keeping my soul, but using it as a useful tool. But you were kind of, maybe
I was a late adopter.
A late adopter, yeah. What did you think about it when I and others started saying like, hey, Nick, you should give this a shot?
Well, so first of all, I mean, the question is like, what are you using it for? Like you said, like if you're just using it to write funny poems and things like that. I actually did start originally. I first dabbled in it to find jokes, and I was sorely disappointed. Okay. I gotta be honest with you. It was not good at jokes.
Okay. But you are good at jokes. You don't need this. You're actually, dude, your sermons, like they make me laugh. I'd say 75% of the time.
Well, I will tell you, it's not from ChatGPT.
I know.
So yeah, thanks. But I started out in it for that. And then I think the next thing I used it for was just a few research things. I was kind of dabbling in it. And right away I found errors. Yeah. So I here's what I put in for it. I was looking for quotes from the church fathers on a particular topic. I think maybe the incarnation. And so I started putting in their, prompts and requests for them. And then I went into actual like search engines and cross-referenced them and found out that in many cases the quote was correct, but it was attributed to the wrong person and things like that. And so, yeah, I was pretty cautious about the reliability of it.
Yeah, exact same. Not with church fathers, but see, we've talked about this on another episode, actually, long ago. But something I used to do, something that I like to do when I have the time. After my sermon's mostly done, I like to read local newspapers or search local newspapers and see like the letters to the editor, or see like, is there like a locally known person, or is like an event about this that I could pull in as kind of a contemporary or local story? And then I kind of thought, hey, I'll just have ChatGPT do that for me. And I just could not believe my luck, because turns out, Mary McAleese, the president of Ireland, she actually had something to say about like church discipline. I couldn't believe my luck, so like it was creating these like perfect killer quotes from me from recognizable people that I was like thrilled to include. And then turns out, oh yeah, that never happened. So I actually, so I'm just right at the beginning of this interview, I want to say I used it wrong, where I think I searched for the quote, couldn't find the quote, and then I assumed, oh, it must be too old, or maybe it's not digitized. And then I included a quote from Mary McAleese about something that wasn't actually hers. So I am once bitten, twice shy about quoting people from it.
Interesting. So isn't there a name for that with AI, where they call it? It's called like
plagiarism.
There's a name for when it like makes up stuff that's
Slop?
Not true. Oh, okay.
Maybe slop.
That wasn't the one I had heard, but
okay.
It sounds like a good name for something like that.
Yeah. So at the very beginning, I'm just going to admit, I've made mistake. Like it has made mistakes, and then I made mistakes by using it wrong. I think maybe we'll talk later on about maybe the better ways to use it, but it's not there to create, or it's not there to find things for you. I think ultimately that's the best, like we're asking it to do something it's not made to do, when we're asking it to kind of create things for us.
Yeah, that's a good point. Okay. So let's just structure it like this. Let's talk first about ethical considerations when it comes to using AI. And then let's talk about the dangers of AI, and then let's talk about perhaps like good uses of it and positive ways in which it can be used. So let's talk about the ethics. What do you think, Mike? Is it ethical for preachers to use ChatGPT in their sermons, in sermon preparation?
Well, I do, but again, I'm just starting off with this like raw, honest, admittance that I think that I used it incorrectly earlier on when I was asking it to go scour the internet and find quotes for me. I think that that's asking it to create something, as I keep on reiterating. So I think that ethically, it can be a handy tool, similar to Logos Bible software that you use. I think I use it, where that's actually asking it to quickly scour through lexicons, commentaries, and then pull up relevant things for us within kind of a closed system. I think that if we're going to be okay with using that, or even Google, I think that there's like room for ethical use of this. What are your thoughts on this? Like, you've done a degree that kind of touches a little bit on like interpretation and reading of texts. Maybe you're even more qualified to think about this than I am.
Yeah, I think that the integrity part is really important. Like the integrity and the fact of like, okay, are you interpreting the text yourself? Are you using, the interpretive tools and resources from history and other things like that in order to do it? Or are you just, taking this cheap shortcut? And if you do, I think it will catch up with you.
Yeah.
I don't think this is a replacement for spirit-filled believers and, who are able to critically engage. I think it will get better over time, but I think that, even if it does get better, I think that there's an ethical issue here where it kind of maybe borders on a bit of plagiarism or dishonesty. Yeah. Well, let me ask you this, Mike. Did you ask ChatGPT for help in preparing for this interview?
No, I did not.
Wow.
No,
that's
a
lot of integrity, Mike.
Yeah, I was actually like, the thought crossed my mind, but I thought, no, I'm just going to straight up raw dog this. I'm going to think of this on my own.
There you go. Wow. How did that feel? Just like, you're just like out at sea without a rudder.
Yeah. Yeah. So yeah. Did you?
Oh yeah, of course I did.
I figured one of us would, but I didn't want it to be me.
Okay, cool. No, I just asked it a few questions. But yeah, I will tell you this. I found it like, again, woefully inadequate at doing some things where I think that sometimes when people say, oh, well, you're using AI to prepare a sermon or whatever. I've just given it a shot, like, hey, prepare a sermon on this. And it's not very good. Usually, I got to be honest. Like I said, it probably will get better, but maybe that's good that it's not good yet. Mm-hmm. And I've asked it to do other things, like prepare a script for a video that I was needing to produce. And I just find it to be not very good. The other one is sometimes, like a staff member, I'll ask them to draft up a post for something or a description about something, and I can usually pick out if it's AI generated.
Yeah.
Because I think the language is a little bit too verbose most of the time. Like it's just, too many adjectives and too many superlatives and things like that. It doesn't sound like a human being.
Yeah. And it'll say, if it says, come join us on Sunday as Pastor Nick delves into Matthew 21. Whenever I see the word delve anywhere, I know that was just copy and paste, because humans don't say delve. ChatGPT says delve about everything.
Okay. So, okay. So the ethics of it, I think that, the one issue is like plagiarism, dishonesty, kind of like cheating in a way.
Yeah.
I think those are real issues. I think the other issue, which maybe this falls more in the danger category, is relying on ChatGPT rather than seeking the guidance and the wisdom of the Holy Spirit in doing that. The other, again, ethics and danger, I guess, are tied to each other, because I think another thing that comes to my mind is the fact that, if you are asking ChatGPT to do theology for you, right? Like to come to theological conclusions, even parse out something. I mean, you don't know what you're getting, because what you're getting is kind of a conglomeration of everything that it found on the internet, and you're asking it to make a decision and judgment. And I think that is dangerous and unethical. So, yeah.
And okay. And number one, like we use language about like how it thinks or it talks, like it actually doesn't think. It compiles what every like English writer on the internet has said about a certain thing. And I'm from what I know, it's like we call it AI. Like I think technically it's not. It's like a learning language model. So it's not actually thinking, but it's summarizing the human thoughts of others. So on the one hand, like we talk about plagiarizing AI, but AI kind of plagiarizes the whole internet and then it summarizes it together. So there's kind of even like these dual layers of this, for whatever that's worth. But I love what you're talking about when it comes to like the ethics. Cause like on the one hand, there's the ethic of like, we're tempted to, plagiarize the plagiarizer. But I mean, I'm in my library. I know you're like, I can look, I see hundreds of books, from where I'm sitting. I'm tempted to take every one of those ideas, or I have the opportunity to take any one of those ideas from Dan Kimball or from Alexander Strauch or Mark Dever and to take those as my own. So I think the temptation to take things as your own, like that's always there. And that's an ethical thing that every preacher, every communicator always has to do. So I think the temptation to plagiarize is constant and ever present, but not necessarily new. But I like what you're kind of saying earlier on about like, what kind of person is this going to make you? Kind of constantly go into this thing where you don't have to scour a book anymore, but you ask it to quickly scour the internet for you. That's the sort of thing that I think I'm cautious about, and I'm concerned about the future of what it would be like for our kids to grow up constantly having this kind of from their teenage years and up, the ability to find the specific information about anything without ever having to like think long and hard about it or do a proper search for it. So I think formatively, I think it's good to turn pages, look for things, think about things.
Yeah, no, I agree. I mean, yeah, the technology shapes the person who uses it. Absolutely. And I mean, I wonder, previous generations probably thought that exact same thing about us, right?
Exactly.
Like, what are these guys? They have all these libraries, all this information. Then we had the internet, and it's just like, yeah, it just continues to go. And yet there's something beyond us, or beyond just information gathering, right? Which makes us human and which makes us unique. And yeah, I think that it's interesting. So it's a wonderful tool, but yeah, the technology we use shapes us as people as well.
Yeah, and there's certainly, there's a spectrum to everything. And you're right, our parents or grandparents had concerns about the technology that was coming into being for them. They were worried about us. And then now, likewise, we have the same. But, I run the Expositors Collective Twitter account, which, every day I pre-schedule, one or two quotes about sermon preparation or delivery, and there's this one guy. I don't know if I should name him, but he like negatively responds to every single tweet, every single one of them. And he says like the same thing always. He's like, don't prepare, just trust the Holy Spirit. Don't, and then like, it's just variations of that. And I don't reply to him. He's just some guy. He just says that all the time. I don't think he listens to the podcast. If he does, hello, Andrew. Hello, I see you, and I'm ignoring you on purpose. But that's kind of one thing. The idea of like preparing at all, thinking about what you say in the pulpit before you get up is an act of not trusting God, the Holy Spirit. And so that's like that's like so fringe. That's not. I don't really respect that very much. But then on the other hand, we can go this other thing, which is like, well, we could just feed in a prompt to this machine to explain what the Calvary Global Network holds to, what's our kind of statement of faith, then to even talk about, I'm Nick Cady, I'm in Longmont, Colorado, my church is like this, and I want, and then you kind of can feed it all this stuff and then say, now produce a 3-point sermon with a good introduction and captivating illustrations, and it can spit something out. And then you can maybe like proofread it and then go deliver it. And that's the other end of the extreme. And of course, we're not advocating for that, certainly. Somewhere in between what Andrew is saying and what could be done of just like hitting print and walking into the pulpit with the ink still dry and then just letting the algorithm preach the sermon for you.
Yeah, that's a good point. And I mean, the other thing to remember is that, yes, this is about preaching, right? So we're talking about AI and sermon preparation. But I think that it would be important to acknowledge the fact that pastors are not just preaching machines. In fact, like at our church, we have 5 pastors on staff. And what that means is that the majority of our pastors spend the majority of their time not preparing sermons. So what do they need? They need to actually be theologians who are able to talk to real people and not just tell them, well, I'll get back to you after I, go over here and ask ChatGPT for the answer. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, if you can just ask ChatGPT for the answer, then why would anyone need a pastor, right? So obviously, there are more skills and more things involved than just disseminating information, than all of these things, right? So a pastor is called to be a shepherd, and that involves more than just collecting and regurgitating information.
And you're right, like pastors aren't just preaching machines, and then also pastors aren't just answers machines. Like that shepherding sometimes doesn't involve just simply giving the correct answer. That's maybe more of like, what seminaries are for, Bible colleges, or actually not even just that. So again, this is a tool that can summarize what is available on the internet. And that's kind of a useful thing. Yeah.
Yeah. Okay. So what do you think? Let's talk about, so maybe summarize what we've said about ethics. Let me see if I can do it. And then maybe you can add to it. I think that there's an integrity question. And I think that, yes, I mean, like, are you being honest? Are you plagiarizing? Are you shortcutting in a way that portrays yourself to be something which you are not actually? I think that that's an issue. I think there's, the danger of outsourcing spiritual discernment rather than dependence on the Holy Spirit. That is a uniquely Christian ethical issue. And I think there's also the issue of authenticity, right? Because people come and they want to hear the heart of the pastor, not necessarily the heart of a, what do you call it? A language-based,
learning
generative, learning model. Yeah. Okay. So those are, I think, some of the ethical issues. I think the biggest one being portraying yourself as, being something that you're not.
Yeah. And again, I admitted it right at the beginning. I did that when I taught 1 Corinthians 5. When I wanted to portray myself as like a very, very culturally aware, that I found this quote from this influential Irish voice, that really spoke into this certain issue. So that was, I think, what I did there was I tried to present myself as like more informed and more dialed in than I actually was. So I admit that, and that was wrong. But I think that there's an article that I read a long time ago. It was called "How Google is Making Us Dumber," and there's an image that stuck with me. He talks about like we can be like skimming over the surface of an ocean like a jet ski. There's all this depth, but then we're just kind of skimming across the top. And if that's true for Google a couple of years ago, then the capacity for that with these learning language models or whatever they're called is certainly there as well.
Okay. Well, let's talk about some dangers. So we've talked about the danger of inaccuracy. So there's that. What were some of the other dangers that we could bring up?
Well, just like the damage to your own like soul. And when I say soul, maybe I'm meaning more just like our internal self, the ability to just maybe think long and hard about something or really, really craft something. Like, why should you when you can just get a pretty good answer or a pretty good paragraph written or a pretty good essay written about anything really quick. So I think there's like a damage to our interior life and like our mental development, keeping those muscles sharp. And then of course, like that has to have some corrosive damage on, the spirit inside of us as well, if we're constantly doing that as well. So I think that's a danger. What would you contribute?
Yeah, maybe I think the theological one is important, right? So AI is essentially synthesizing information, but it's not a human being that is filled with the Holy Spirit. So we need to think about issues like discernment, wisdom, again, theological nuance. It could give answers that don't align with your doctrinal beliefs. So you need to be careful of that. I think it's unwise to ever just take something that AI says and just give it back to somebody else.
Correct. Yes. Yes. Wholeheartedly agree. I've done it before. I won't do it again.
Yeah. So I think, the devaluation of biblical study, I think that's an important one where it's like, as you were saying, right, we could just skim over the ocean on a jet ski and not delve into things, not have discussions. Yeah. I think.
Did you just say delve?
I did. I actually do use that word. I use that word all the time.
You do?
But there are other words that I've seen ChatGPT use that I would never use. But I think they're just like really effusive, like overly effusive. Like, okay, I'll give you an example. I had someone send me a draft for a post that we were going to make. And it was like this life-changing whatever. And I was just like, yeah, that sounds like did you really say that? Like, you really think that my message on Thursday is going to be,
it could be life enhancing.
Yeah. So I use the word delve all the time.
You do. Okay. And you are a real human.
If I was a jet ski, I'd want to get underneath the water. Okay.
Well, I stand corrected. And I can verify to the listeners, Nick is a real human. I have seen him in real life. We have shaken hands. We've hugged.
Yeah. One of my favorite things that we did together, Mike, just to talking about like words that people don't actually use, is we were in Serbia and you began your message with this sentence and like none of the words were translatable.
Really? Oh.
Yeah, you use the word beleaguered, you know, and all these things. And the translator was just like, and then you're like, worn out, tired, beat up. And he's like, oh, okay. If you're going to talk like a human, then maybe I can help you.
Oh, man. Okay. Well,
do you remember that?
I do. Yeah, I also remember at a CGN conference, I was on a panel and I was trying to, and I used the word panopticon, and I got called out. I got called out for that.
Hey, but since I heard you use that word beleaguered, I've started using it in my sermons, and I really like using it. Yeah,
with such a good word.
With an English-speaking audience, it works great.
Yes, it does. Yeah. Well, thanks. Well, I'm
all right,
glad that we're both smart. Now everybody knows.
Let's talk about the good use of AI. What are some positive ways that you have used it, and what are the benefits you've gotten out of it?
Yeah, I'm stoked to talk about some of the things that I've found over the past I think 2 years or so that it's been like commercially available. Like there's some now like the church that I'm a part of, you know, I'm the only full-time staff. You know, we have volunteers, we have some part-time people, but like that means that like in my pastoral role, I do probably more stuff than you do, Nick. So I sometimes I make the slides. I'm involved in a lot of admin type stuff. And this ChatGPT is actually killer for this type of stuff, for taking data and saying, organize this into like a modifiable spreadsheet, or like take this financial information and turn it into a pie chart, because we have an AGM coming up and I want to show this. And yes, I could use Canva, I could build it this way, but like, how about you just do it instead? So there's some like very, very like numbers, admin oriented stuff, you know, for the podcast that I host, and probably for you as well too. It's actually quite good at saying like, hey, here's a transcript. Can you summarize this for me? And so like those types of things, everyone agrees that's quite easy, because it doesn't have like the import of like on the Lord's day speaking the Lord's word to the Lord's people. So I find a lot of just like easy, low hanging fruit for that. It's not really what this podcast is about, but at the very least, I think everyone can agree it could be useful for spreadsheets and pie charts and that.
Well, and it helps you to have time for sermon preparation.
Yes, absolutely. Yeah, that's right. Thank you. When it comes to sermon stuff, like, so throughout the week, as I'm working on a passage, as I'm crafting it together, when I'm almost done, so when I'm like most of the way done, let's say, I don't know, Thursday midday or something like that, there's been progress made. That's kind of when I will like really fire things up and then use ChatGPT more and more once it's mostly done. And so I'll kind of like copy and paste the whole message in there. And then I'll ask questions about my sermon to this machine. And I ask like, are there any logical fallacies that you see in here? And it kind of, you know, there's usually one or two. It's like, hey, you're using false equivalency here, or this is kind of a red herring. And that is like it's insightful to see a critical eye look at this. And I'm not asking them to say like, is this spiritually enriching? It's just like, does this logically make sense? And that kind of has prompted me to notice some things. And, you know, sometimes it says like, oh, you're making too many exclusive statements. And it's like, yeah, well, the Bible's an exclusive book, you know, and it's an exclusive gospel. So some of its critiques I dismiss, but then some of them, it makes me kind of rethink these things. I could talk for a long time. Do you do something like that? Like, what's your... Do you have questions that you ask it about your sermon, or are you using it in the process of creating the sermon?
I'm using it more. I try not to have it create things for me because, like I said, I don't don't fully trust it. Again, I think the ethical issue and is the one that drives that consideration as well. But I have been using it in this way. I'll just give you some insight in my sermon preparation. So I do sermon preparation, and then on Saturday night, I'm always done before I go to sleep, but sometimes that pushes my sleeping a little bit back, right? So what I'll do on Saturday night is I do kind of my final edit. And a lot of times my final edit involves, okay, now I'm going to write my conclusion. Sometimes I'll leave that for Saturday night once I've had time to kind of like stew over everything that I'm saying. And other times, really my biggest thing is I do a big edit. I always tell my staff pastors here too as well, like editing is an act of love. Edit your sermon, make it shorter, make it more focused, right? Don't waste people's time with tangential stuff. And so for me, I usually spend sometimes 2 to 3 hours editing my sermon, trying to get it down, get it more focused. And so what I've been doing a few times now is I'll ask ChatGPT. I did this past weekend. I needed, because I go based on word count. That's how I know how long my sermon will be. So I need my sermon to be around 4,500 words to fit within 38 minutes. And so I was over that number. And so I put it into ChatGPT and said, okay, I need to reduce this by 500 words. Where do you think are the best places that I could reduce my word count? And it said, okay, well, this thing you're saying here, it's interesting, but it's not really helpful to the sermon. And you could remove that. And I looked at it and I considered and I said, yeah, I'm going to remove that. There was another place where it said, you could cut this way down, this illustration, or sometimes it tells me to get rid of my jokes. I'm telling you, ChatGPT is inherently not funny.
Unfunny.
Yeah. So, and I've told it before, like, no, I'm not going to do that. Yeah, I'm going to keep that. So anyway, that's one way that I found it helpful. But another thing I found, again, this isn't directly like Sunday morning preaching, but I had to do a class we have this thing called Bible Learning Center, and it's kind of like classroom style learning. And so I did a 6-week class on Isaiah, and I was like, man, how do I divide up Isaiah into 6 weeks? And what would what are the natural breaks in the book like that I should probably be aware of? And I asked it to help me create an outline for 6 weeks of that, just like break down the text to like what parts of the text should I cover in these 6 weeks? And it did a really good job. And that was really helpful for me just to kind of like say, okay, I've got that. Now I can begin studying and plugging in.
That's really cool on that. So I'm going to assume it did not just say, well, 6 weeks, 66 chapters, 11 chapters per, like it probably didn't do that. It probably actually broke it down along like bigger pericopes. Yeah.
Absolutely. Yeah. It actually broke it down according to the natural, the parts of the book that are, built in structure. Yeah. That was really helpful.
That's pretty cool. Because you expect a computer to just, divide it up equally into these slices. But
yeah. However, I also did another class on one of the Gospels.
Yes.
And the breakdown it gave me was pretty weird sometimes. And I'm not sure that I liked it. So again, I find it to be really helpful as a conversational partner.
1,000%. Yep. Yeah. It's like it's one voice among many, maybe,
Mm-hmm.
and it's also kind of like, it's like the ability of texting somebody very smart, but they don't have a lot of social cues, and maybe we all know people like that. Like they know a lot of information, but sometimes they talk too much or sometimes they don't know, So if you know people like that, it's like that person who's always awake and who's never tired of you, and you're able to ask those types of things. And we have we can then decide whether to take that person's advice or not.
Yeah, I actually have people like that and I have groups like that, but you're right. I have to be really careful, how many things I ask them, because I don't want to be that overly annoying person who's like, this guy's always badgering me. But that's the nice thing about AI is that at least it pretends to not get sick of me.
Yeah. Yeah. Something that I do with, and actually I've heard you talk about not only just like shortening the whole sermon. You've mentioned to me that sometimes you would take a certain paragraph or your opening story and say, make this 10% shorter or something like that. Is that right?
I do that. Yeah. And actually I was just talking with one of our other pastors in the hall before I came in to record and just asked him like, what do you think are like the biggest issues here? Cause he uses it all the time for everything, and he said that he finds that it helps him to get over his hesitation to write. Oh. And I find the same. Oh. So for example, I'm a terrible perfectionist, and especially when it comes to writing. And what's funny about being a perfectionist is it doesn't mean that you actually do perfect work. It just means that you're like obsessed with trying to not make mistakes and trying to. It's really ironic because just because you're a perfectionist doesn't mean you're actually good at things.
Yeah. So as a perfectionist, it means that you have a really high self-image and that you don't want to put something out that betrays that you're not really as good as you think you are.
Yikes. Okay.
I've been doing some work, man. I've been doing some work on this. Sorry if I hurt you when I said that.
No, you're not hurting me. I mean, I think that it's resonating with that's probably a big part of it. But I recognize that about myself. And so here's how that's manifested as a preacher. I know I used to be way worse at this, but AI has kind of helped me get a little bit over it. And one of the things I used to do, I can like vividly remember sitting in my basement on a Saturday night, writing and rewriting for 20 to 30 minutes, one sentence. And you know what? The irony is, no matter how I wrote that sentence, I ended up saying it from the pulpit in the way that I was going to say it anyway. It didn't matter. I just wasted 30 minutes writing one sentence, and I'm changing words like prepositions, like should it be an of or a to? And what I felt personally like with this is like, in a way, I give myself the permission to be like, okay, just like get it on the page, write it all out, and then I'll ask ChatGPT to analyze it and make it like clean it up. And the irony is I don't always take its suggestions. Sometimes it'll be like, we should say it like this. I'm like, no, I'm going to say it the way I want to say it. Yeah. But just, it helps me to get over that writer's block or that kind of like perfectionist hump that I have.
Yeah. So I ask, for it to do some helpful critiques, or to point out maybe some blind spots that I might have. But here's something that I do as I get, 75%, or this could be like a Saturday night thing. I ask it to give me feedback on this sermon as if, actually, I have a prompt right here. Let me read this word for word. This is either like the greatest thing or the lamest thing, but I want you to pretend to be a kind, friendly, encouraging homiletics professor who's going to analyze this sermon, which is going to be delivered at Calvary Cork. It's going to be delivered tomorrow morning. Can you give some gentle critiques and offer some tangible bits of advice on how it can be improved, knowing that I have to preach it tomorrow morning? Use the insights of Haddon Robinson and Brian Chappell to formulate your knowledge and critique. Do you have any questions before you proceed? And then it might ask me like a little question or two, and then it's like, and then it pumps it out, and then it gives the absolute best feedback I've ever gotten in my life.
Wow! So give me an example.
Okay, and first off, I kind of like without a specific one, I was just like feeling kind of fragile in my life, so that's why I added things like be gentle. First and foremost, I want to commend you on your commitment to delivering God's word faithfully. Preaching is no small stat. So then it kind of goes on.
It's the critique sandwich.
Yeah. And then it gives, here's the strengths, there's a strong thematic focus. There's an engaging and relatable introduction. You're faithful to the text. You have a good tone. And then areas of improvement. It says that you need to clarify the main preaching idea. What's the big idea? And then it offers a big idea. Perhaps you could do this. It says you should tighten the transitions between your sections. It says right now some sections flow naturally, others feel like abrupt shifts. And then a few more. It says to strengthen the conclusion, have there be a stronger call to action. In fact, what ChatGPT always tells me to do is to have a stronger call to action at the end. Okay. And I think I kind of get it. Yes, there should be. But also I think that sometimes the critique is like, I need to be telling people to do more things.
Yeah.
And that maybe is maybe a misunderstanding of Christian preaching that isn't necessarily always only ever going to end with, now at the conclusion, here's 4 things you needed to do. So I respectfully disagree with this machine about how they should be concluded. But that's kind of walking through a prompt that I gave it that actually really helped. And that was like 2 weeks ago. Last week I preached with zero help from ChatGPT at all.
Amazing.
I know it can be done. It can be done. So I haven't reused that certain prompt, but I actually saved it because I thought it was pretty good.
Yeah. Just thinking about like the way that technology has shaped things, if you read a book from today and you compare that with a book from like 400 years ago, there's a major difference. And you know what? Okay. So for example, you've got like War and Peace, which is considered to be like a masterpiece. But if you've ever actually read it, there's probably like 200 pages in there that could have just been edited out.
That's right.
Right.
Yeah.
Or like Anna Karenina. It's like, do I really need to know all of those things about like, the upper crust of Russian society? Maybe it's interesting. And actually like historically, yeah, I guess it's kind of cool. But I've read several books. Okay. I'll give you an example. And I hope nobody, maybe they stopped listening by now. So hopefully, because I've read I read Augustine's Confessions, and some parts of it were just like, this is one of the greatest things ever written. Mm-hmm. And then other parts of it, you're like, I think he needed an editor. Like, I think he needed just like someone to come and be like, you know what, let's organize this a little bit better so that people can track with you better. So if you read a book today, it goes through an editing process, and, it's just way more focused. Mm-hmm. And you could say maybe we've lost something in there. I mean, maybe there's something to Anna Karenina having 300 pages about, Russian aristocracy. Maybe there's something important about being able to have that and just like go through it. So I don't know. I think that that's part of it. And I think that, maybe this is something that we're also experiencing now. Is like, okay, it's essentially working as an editor, as a critiquer, as a voice saying, okay, here's how to improve this. And yeah, there are benefits maybe and downsides to it. Yeah.
And, Victor Hugo spent like 100 pages describing like the sewer system underneath Paris, and it eventually paid off, kinda. But yeah, you didn't need to, but it really set a stage. And I don't read that many of the classics, but my wife, she likes watching old films, and I try to be a good husband and watch them with her, but yeah, it's the same thing. They could be just so slow, just slowly developing things, or even just the amount of like silence or the amount of like panning shots. Whereas our contemporary films don't have that. And certainly like the TikTok generation is just built around like fast cuts, short, quick, to the point. And I was listening to like an editor, like a copyright editor talk about something. And, she's saying like the agreed upon goal for most editors today is like a 5th grade reading level, and realistically probably a 4th grade reading level. And again, that's good. And for us as preachers, there's a lot of mental capacities and life stages and ages in our churches. And so we do want to be broadly accessible. But yeah, is the 4th grade really the goal? And yeah, so I agree. I'm teasing the things out with you.
Yeah. And I've had, our staff members and things like that, talk about like, have Christians today gone too far with wanting to like make things so concise and so punchy?
Yeah.
Like maybe there is more room for for us to just slow down and have some of those moments in the sermon that are instructive, but they're not necessarily, So anyway, I think that there's some room for that.
Yeah. Can I talk about another thing that I've discovered about ChatGPT that I don't think enough people know about? Did you know that you can talk to ChatGPT and it talks back to you?
I've done it on my phone. In fact, I did it with my kids. It was really fun. We were on vacation and they were like, "Oh, tell us about what's his name? Snowden, the guy who did the NSA leak."
Yeah.
And so I just like, it was like on the car Bluetooth. And I was like, "Oh, tell us about this and tell us both sides, like give us both sides of the argument."
Yeah.
And it did. And it talked for a few minutes. And then the kids would literally, like when it stopped talking from the back seat, they would like have a follow-up question. And then it would answer their question. It was actually really cool.
Yeah, it's actually great for car rides. Like, if I don't drive very often, but like sometimes, like Ireland's a very walking culture, but like I've driven from Cork to Limerick with no music, no podcast. I'm just talking to ChatGPT the whole time, asking questions about the goodness. It also, the Talmud. I'm like, tell me about the Talmud. What is it? And then I've heard the Talmud says this crazy thing. Is that true? And why would it be there? And what's, and this like very long conversation that I'm just like more fast. Again, it's kind of like texting your smart friend, but now you can talk to your smart friend and he's never going to get bored. And it's just like a battle of who's going to get bored first. So, okay. But this is something, and I haven't done this for like about a month, so I've this has fallen off the radar of things that I've been doing, but I will start a conversation on my computer, because on the computer, you're able to like load files onto it, but you're not able to talk. And then on the phone, you're able to talk, but I don't think you can load files. So I start a chat on the thing and then I pick it up on the thing on my phone. So I'll load in a few different commentaries on this section, or even a transcript from a sermon. And then on my walk home, I'll be like talking to ChatGPT and saying like, "Hey, what are the divergent views on this?" Or, I've walked home and I'd say, "Hey, can you compare and contrast what David Guzik says about this passage with what William Barclay says?" And then it's them. You kind of like, "Well, Guzik says this, David," And I remember once where it was Matthew 11, "Come to me, all you who are burdened, heavy laden, I will give you rest." And I put an article from John Mark Comer and a quote and a page or two from Augustine, and then I said, I'm just like trying these things out, and I said, "Hey, could you please imagine a conversation between John Mark Comer and Augustine talking about what the rest is?" And then it just generated this conversation. It's the same voice back and forth, but I'm like listening in on this like incredibly contemporary, like as contemporary as you can get, the most 2025 man alive, and John and Augustine talking back and forth. And again, it's guessing on what they would say to each other, but it really teases out the ways that they think about that. I'm not quoting that in my sermon, but just in these days leading up to it, it's actually really helpful to like spur thoughts as I listen in on this kind of a fake podcast. It was really helping me to think these things, and then kind of like, well, which one of these actually sounds closer to what I think Jesus is talking about, and then also which of these I think is offering something useful to my own congregation. So those are some like, that's all there, and it's a really fun feature.
Well, Mike, you and I actually had a real chat conversation about AI. you remember this? So about what you do with the prompts, I found this really helpful. Maybe some preachers would find it helpful too. So, you mentioned just a few minutes ago how you would put your sermon in and say, okay, act like a kind homiletics professor.
Oh, yes. I know. Yes.
Yeah. And then you said that you gave it like different prompts, and you said, okay, you put one of my sermons in there.
Yes.
And you asked it to, I don't know, it was like the snarkiest, most cynical
roast.
Most roast me. And I really enjoyed it. I got to be honest. But it was like, it was mean, and it was, but it was almost funny. And actually reading it caused me to think, okay, actually, I think I did pretty well with that sermon, right? Because like, if this is the biggest critique you've got, like this is your roast, then I'm feeling pretty good.
I think the prompt was like, imagine a roast comedian, like in the style of Tony Hinchcliffe, who has been to seminary and who understands homiletics. Like, have this guy tear Nick Cady's sermon to shreds.
Yeah, that was great. I enjoyed that, but I think it's also helpful, like as a tool. Like, okay, look, this is what you could possibly expect, like from that extreme. And most of the time you're not going to get that from your congregation. So
right, yes, and I got it just for the listeners. I had your consent. And then also too, probably just for like mental health, like don't do that all the time.
Yeah, is that what you do? Like without my consent, is like you're just like, hey, tear up this guy's sermon. Tell me what was bad about it.
No, that was just I think that was something I did for like half of a day, and then I haven't done it ever since. Okay.
I'll tell you one more use of AI that I've used, and I find it semi-helpful. Okay. So I will, every week I do this thing. I have a big idea statement that I use in my sermon. I try to summarize the message into a sentence. And so I also, I want to have a title that's going to be helpful to people. It's going to tell them, if they look at it from 3 years from now, okay, what is this sermon going to be about? And I also want it to be something that would cause them to want to click on it and listen to it in the future. And so here's what I found to be helpful though. I'll take a passage and I'll just start putting ideas into this. In fact, I got the idea for doing this from you. This is one of my first experiences with AI. We were together in a hotel room. I don't know if you remember this in the, what is that? Inland Empire in California?
Yeah.
Yeah. And I was telling you, I really need to hone in my big idea. And here's what I want to say, but I can't figure out how to put it into one sentence. And you said, well, let's ask ChatGPT. So we did. And I didn't use the sentence it gave me, but it gave me enough to get to what I was thinking. It was basically like, oh, well, the response it gave, that's not exactly what I had in mind. I was more thinking like this. And then what I said was the thing. So that's a conversation partner idea. But so what I've learned to do though, is I'll put in like all the stuff I'm thinking, probably 3-4 sentences. Here's really what I hope to communicate that I believe this text is saying, etc. And then I'll say, give me 10 variations. And then what I'll usually do is I'll kind of look through them and I'll say, okay, yes on that, no on this, yes on that. And then I'll write my own sentence. But just having it help me process and help me use words is helpful. And I'll do the same thing with the title. Give me 10 potential titles. And oftentimes I hate most of them, but there will be like one where I'm like, oh, that's more the direction I wanted to go. So yeah.
Yeah. It's essentially, it's kind of like a whiteboard session. But instead of with you and your team, it's just kind of you and this thing. And seeing those options, some of them are just plain old bad. But you articulate, I don't like that, and here's why. And then even as you're saying why I don't like it, then clarity oftentimes comes.
Yeah. So, Mike, how would you round out this discussion?
Man, I mean, so all of those cautions that we were saying at the beginning, they're all true. They're still true. And I think if somebody were only listening to that first half, they'll think, oh yeah, Mike and Nick are kind of down on this. But if they were only listening to the second half, they'd say they're the most enthusiastic supporters of it. And so I realized there's kind of that tension, but yeah. And then also too, again, I think and I didn't do this as like a purge leading up to this. I think it's actually, I really enjoyed a phenomenally analog, low tech sermon prep process for me. This past week, I was traveling. Got back home Friday night, and then basically Saturday was my sermon prep day, and I was jet lagged, and there's all these things, and I just like sat and I just like had a pen and a pencil, and I just like wrote out so much stuff, and just that process, praying, thinking. I've been missing my church. I'm trying to think like, what do I want to say to my church, and then just kind of writing that stuff down. That was so good for me. And so I'm here, and I totally, this is a regular week. Come Thursday, I will start using these tools, but last Saturday, I just had like such a special time with like a Bible and the Lord and a notebook. And, I think it was a good enough sermon that came out. Could ChatGPT have made it, 5% shorter and 10% funnier? Actually, no, it can't make it funnier, but the power is in the Lord's word. The power is in God's word. As a preacher, we want to be a fully human, a human man addressing the congregation that's in front of us. And we want to be caring for them and loving them. And I think as an act of love, we can be using a tool like this, or a tool like Logos Bible Software, or a tool like Halley's Concordance, or a tool like a commentary. We can use all of these as tools to help us as embodied humans to communicate God's word to the people that we're called to shepherd and care and love for.
That's a good word. Thanks, Mike. All right. Well, I think that's it for now. What would you hope people do with all this information? Man, yeah. I would hope that the person who has been completely dismissive of this might just like open a tab and just like fiddle around with it. The people that think that preachers who would use ChatGPT, that the only category that they have is that we're just opening it up and saying, give me a sermon, please. And then that we would then hit print and then go like that. I don't think anyone is using that, or nobody who listens to this podcast is doing that. That's not what people are doing. I think it's exciting to be part of kind of like a learning community as we're trying to like carefully and cautiously figure out the best practices to use this new technology that's available to us. I'd like someone that's been suspicious to continue their skepticism, but then also extend a little bit of generosity towards preachers who do use ChatGPT, that we're still being as prayerful and careful and thoughtful and trying to use this as one resource amongst many, not the only one. So that's kind of the hope. I'm thinking of that skeptic in mind. Mm-hmm. What's your hope? I think similarly. I think that, I guess I'll talk about the other side of it. I think that, if there is anybody who is completely just like depending on this, that they would really consider, using it as a tool ethically and be aware of some of the dangers of it. So, don't use it uncautiously, I guess would be the other side of this. All right. Well, then, can I say it? Can I say the outro? Oh, please. I hope that this and every episode of Theology for the People and Expositors Collective Podcast help you to grow in your personal study and public proclamation of God's Word. Well, hey, thanks for listening all the way to the end. I want to let you know about something that's happening soon. So you've just finished listening to essentially just two dudes talking about ChatGPT, AI, theology, practice, and ethics. And we're just ordinary pastors talking. As kind of a follow-on from this conversation, Nick and I each have our own conversations with Dr. Paul Hoffman. Dr. Paul Hoffman is one of the co-authors of the excellent book, AI Shepherds and Their Digital Sheep, which is, a couple hundred pages
thinking through these issues at a much deeper level. He co-wrote it with a professor of transhumanism philosophy, and Dr. Paul Hoffman is a theologian in his own regard as well. So now that you've heard the amateurs talk about it, make sure that you keep listening as you'll hear me talk to a real expert. And then over on the Theology for the People podcast, you're going to hear Nick speak to a real expert as well. I hope to meet some of you in person April 4th and 5th in Longmont, Colorado. Otherwise, I will see you next Tuesday for the next episode of the Expositors Collective podcast.
This podcast is a part of CGN Media, a podcast network that points to Christ. We are supported by listeners like you. To help us create more great shows, visit cgnmedia.org/support.